Kitselas as possible, from clearing the trees for the reserve over on Queensway to serving to modern day contemporary treaty negotiator for both Kitselas and Kitselas. I should announce that if you see the posters, it says, you know, because being an academic, we're very linear. I chose the 4th and the 11th and the 18th and 25th of the month as being the days when we would have the event. And Mel's just informed me, and I'm hoping it's okay to share, that he's been invited to Ottawa to talk about his new book with members of the federal government. So being the flexible individuals that we are, we moved the event from April 25th to May 9th. So the last in our series, which is part of our public speaker series, will now occur on May 9th. And we'll focus on, probably, to me, was the highlight of the whole series, which is on governance. Today's discussion will be on Tsimshian language. Mel is one of the few fluent speakers that are around in Kitselas to this day. And he's going to talk to us about his experiences in learning the language and his prescriptions on how he thinks it might be taught to the next generation. With that, won't you help me welcome Mel Bevan, our elder listener. Oh, just one last thing. You have to fill out your papers. That's how we pay for the food. People are George to keep track of numbers and things. My apologies.
Yeah.
Do you want to get your mic, Mel?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see so many people here again today. It's always nice to talk to a lot of people. And one thing, actually, the thing in Ottawa is actually a project that's working with the University of Waterloo. And what it is they're doing a project to examine how band communities can get out from under the Indian Act. And what they wanted was some of the people who've actually lived it, as opposed to people who went to school to learn it. So I'm one of those people who actually lived it. So, and that's one of the reasons that they sent me an invitation to help develop a process to do that. Anyway, today I want to talk about the Tsimshian language, and what I'm calling it is the language of the Lower Skeena, because the word Tsimshian itself doesn't mean a language, and it doesn't mean a group of people. It actually means a location. Tsimshian means it's the mouth of the Skeena River, or up into about to this area. That's the location that the word Tsimshian refers to. Now the language is used from Kitselas to the coast, including Kitkatla, Hartley Bay, Klemtu, and there's also Metlakatla, Alaska. Again, and the word Tsimshian, again, like Kitselas doesn't, if you read our history, ancient history, Kitselas never called themselves Tsimshian, right? We were just Kitselas. There was another group called the Tsimshian that was towards the coast. But also the Kitkatla people say they're not Tsimshian, because they're an island people. They say they're an island people, and they've never lived in the Skeena. So they say they're not Tsimshian. The language is actually Shamalyach is what the language is. That's what it is. Right? And I'll get into explaining that later. Now all the different groups, everybody has a different way of speaking. The Kitselas being the furthest inland, which is pretty close to the Gitxsan, so we have a lot of our words are similar to the Gitxsan. So we have a closer to the Gitxsan language. And I find it, the language is similar. What happened to my technical guy here? Anyway, where did he go? But in talk, like I worked about 10 years with the Gitxsan people, and I pretty much learned a lot of their, because it's similar. Not just, if you only spoke Tsimshian language, you find it really difficult to understand the Gitxsan language because it is different. But if you're really fluent in it, the Tsimshian language, you can understand. You can't speak it, but you can understand it. So, and the closest that we have are like the Kijigukla people. I find it easier to understand the young people when they're speaking than I do with the Kispiox people. They have it's a little more complicated. And but because I'm not, even though I'm called a fluent speaker, I'm not actually, no comparisons to the really old guys, right? That's who were old when I was young. So it is, when I'm talking to the people in like Kijigukla, for example, the young people, I can understand everything they say. But the old timers, they speak a real hard language that's really difficult to understand. Same Tsimshian is the same way. I think Ira Booth from Metlakatla, Alaska, did a lot of work, and he probably has a lot of these old, really old words that he knows about, right? Now, we have, that there are different ways. Like I hear about different dialects all along this, like from Kitkatla to Kitselas, Hartley Bay has a different dialect. It actually isn't a different dialect, because it's the same language, we just use it differently. But it's not a different dialect. There's no, I kind of, when they say that there's a variant for the different words, there really isn't. It's just the way people talk. It's just the way they acquire it over the years. But you can tell where people come from by the way they speak it. For example, like Robert was telling me about his language, on a stretch, some people on the one end talk really fast, and on the other end talk really slow. Tsimshian is the same. We all have different speeds of how we speak. Now, the three languages, the Nas, the upper Skeena, and the lower Skeena, are similar in some ways. They're not the same language. Now, in the books that are written about the Tsimshian language, it says three branches: the Nishka, the Gitxsan, and the Tsimshian, and the so there's actually no such thing. I don't know where that came from, because I don't know who wrote that book. But they are separate languages. They're different languages, right? And in some words, if you know the language, you hear it all the time, right? My mother, for example, could speak all three fluently. She was able to switch. If she was talking to me, she'd speak Somaliach, and if she was talking to, say, Harry Nice, she could switch instantly to his language. She did the same with Gitxsan language. She also spoke English, so you could say she knew 4 languages, right? And it wasn't too common that people could. When I was working in Kispiox, I spent about 10 years up there, and there was one old-timer named Roy Wilson. he was the only one there that could actually speak to me in my language. He was able to switch. So he was one of the last ones that I knew that could actually speak 3 different languages besides my mother. Right? Now, the fluent speakers can pretty much understand each other. You can hear it, and you can get the gist of what they're saying, but you can't. It's hard to speak unless you've actually practiced speaking it. It's not as simple as you don't just speak it, because it is a different language. Right? I'm not sure what language, what comparison I could with other, like Dutch or German or other languages that are similar. Scandinavian languages, I don't know just how that works. Right. Now, all languages evolve depending on the regions, their neighbors, technology, there's all kinds of things that change language. It starts to evolve. Right. And when I say neighbors, we're talking about our European settlers, English, British, whoever they were, came. So our language is beginning to evolve in that direction. Technology, again, the Tsimshian, like the language, the old people would make up words and make meanings. For example, a car, they used to call it a chick. That's what a car was. Right? And I don't know where that came from. It's probably the sound that the Model T Ford makes. It's chick, 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 right? So that's what they called it. And a wheelbarrow is also called a chick, chick. So anything with wheels that you moved around was called that. That's how the language, right? Before the coming of the Model T Ford, there was no such word as chick, chick, right? So it's made a lot of there's new words forming. There's new words. It's happening today, even today. Because Tsimshian language is no different. It evolves, right? It evolves. It has evolved into what is spoken and understood 100 years ago. And recorded and written by William Bevan. I don't know how many of you have heard of William Bevan. If you've worked with some of his stuff. And I know that the university here has a lot of volumes of his, whether they're here or in Prince Rupert. I'm not sure, are they here or in Prince Rupert? Prince Rupert? And there was actually a really good book that came out called The Potlatch at Kijukla. Was put together by Margaret Anderson, and who else was there? There was another 2 of them that came out of the work of William Bevan. It's well written, it's well put together. It's an example of what Bevan wrote. Right? The language that is being taught today and used, and it's actually used in the modern world. I actually heard you say, what did you say about Valentine's Day? Yeah, see, that's something brand new. Right? Yeah, there was no Valentine's Day back. She just made it up. But that's how it worked, yeah. But that's how the language works, right? You can adapt it to make it mean different things, right? And in the 1920s, at the time when Bevan was writing all this stuff, this is what I find really interesting, is that in the 1920s, that's 100 years ago, the people were telling the stories were speaking the old language, right? Spoken in the context of the culture around the time of contact. See, the language that is spoken now is Tsimshian modern, is in current context. But the language that was used back then was I remember sitting there listening to a lot of these, because when I was growing up there was no radios, TVs or television, nothing, right? Our entertainment was to sit around the wood stove and listen to it, and my grandmother would tell story after story after story, and then what? Sometimes my grandfather. There's always somebody telling us stories, right? And they were using the old context. This is an example of some of William Banon's work. I don't know if anybody's ever familiar with his work. He was a Tsimshian, half Tsimshian, and he worked with Barbeau, was an anthropologist. And as far as I know, he spent 30 years writing these stories. Because if you can see, he did 3 lines, every line had 3 lines. One was the story in Tsimshian, in Somalia. The second line is a translation of word for word. And the third line is the story in English. Now he did volumes of this. This is what I got in my basement. Right? It's in my, notice the barbells there. It's my it's my exercise room.
Are those examples of this work or of your own work?
This one? Oh no, this is all Banon's work. All of it is Banon's work. They're copies. They're not originals, right? The originals are still in the National Museum, right? And I know that the UNBC has copies of these. This is only part of his work. He spent 30 years writing these stories because he spoke the language. He spoke both English and Somali, right?
Has it
So
ever been scanned, Mel, electronically?
I don't think they have they. Yeah. But they're not published, right? Oops, where did it go? No, in examining what I've been trying to work on some of this stuff too, because mind you, I do so many different things. It's hard. I can't just stop doing everything else and do it. Just whenever I get time and nothing to do on my hands, I start digging into this stuff. An example of the problem with translating Somali or teaching it or making a dictionary. There's one good word right here. This says qalchap, right? What it means is it's a community, it's a village, which he actually uses it here when he tells the story. This village, qalchap, village, but the translation is tribe, right? So that causes a lot of confusion too, because a lot of the history written about Kitselas and Calam and all the other communities, they're referred to as tribes, when actually the real record says they were qalchap or villages, right? So the translation kind of, and it just how it ended up working, right? And one thing that I'm trying to do, I'm trying to avoid learning the new spelling. I want to learn how he wrote it, because then I can read it. Like for example here, where Sit-atka means when it started. You will notice if you notice in Calam they have a slogan that uses the word Sit-atka. But it's spelled differently from this, right? And so I know I was trying to work with my cousin Lorna Johnson before she died but because she took the course on spelling, and we were constantly debating how it was spelt rather than what it meant. So it kind of gets sidetracked by, right? And that's an awful lot of information. And I've been examining some of these stories based on what they were used for. What are they? There were some that were historical, they talk about history. Like this one here it, I could get into a big story about the halide, but it's really, what halide is, it's a performance. And this is the story of how it started and who invented it and how it was put together. That's the story. If we were talking about the story of Romeo and Juliet, right? How was that written? What's behind it? What's the premise of it? This is similar about this story that they're talking about here. And there's some books on just pure myth. There's a lot of creation stories. They've got creation stories for everything. That similar to any culture. Most people are familiar with the raven stealing the sun. How did the sun get up there? The raven picked it out of a box and put it up there. That's the creation story, right? The Haida have a different creation story about their coming out of the clams. And then you get the Okanagan people talk about the Cayutas as their origin. So on. There's all kinds of origin stories. And a lot of these books include those origin stories. And there's also just what you would almost call fairy tales, where they made up stories to scare kids or to teach them, right? A lot of them was about teaching. It wasn't, they're not just random stories. Every story was composed to do something. So I've been trying to go through them and categorize them and figure out what they were. Mind you, again, it takes time. And I don't know if I'm ever going to get it done. Yeah. So I'm going to need help. Teaching, okay. We were taught as kids by our grandparents. So one thing that when we first learned, that was my first language. And my grandmother, who was one of my Martha Bevan was her name. She's actually she's originally from Port Simpson, I think. And one of my teachers, she didn't speak a single word of English, not one word. She absolutely refused to learn. I think it was one word she asked us one time, what am I supposed to say when people, ask me how I say fine. We taught her to say fine. It's the only word she knew. And it didn't matter what you said to her, she said fine. So it was, and so really what it was, they weren't teaching us the language. We already knew the language, right? But what they were teaching us, it's the same process used by all cultures, to increase our vocabulary. That's what it was. It wasn't to teach us something we didn't know. Because there's a lot of, the difference. And today the difference with the unwritten language is there's no reading and writing. It was all about listening, saying it, and remembering it, right? So it wasn't sitting there writing. Because I was actually involved in when I was in Kispiox, we managed to get a program with a linguist. His name was J. Powell. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. And we developed, I think, about 5-6 books, language books that are used in the schools today in Hazelton of their language. And and he spent a couple of years with the elders in Kispiox and creating these books and stories. And they're actually used to teach now, right? But the problem has been, I talked to some of the teachers, it might have been a year or 2 years ago, and asked them how, just having a conversation. And they said that one of the problems that has developed, we've got a lot of young people who can read and write it, but they can't talk it, right? Because it became reading and writing rather than listening and saying, right? And the written Tsimshian is quite a bit different from the spoken, right? And it's hard to speak, easy to write. And we were taught to remember images rather than memorizing words. Right? We saw pictures in our minds, imagined it. And that's really what it was. That's how the language is made. Like the words for everything. A table, for example. There's no word for table. The word that is used for what people call table is halitrok, which means a surface you eat on. Doesn't mean table. So there's no word table. There's just a description of something you eat on. Right? And a lot of the names of places are descriptions of those places. Like Kitselas is really about, I think I talked about it the last time, about how the word Kitselas, it's of people who live in the narrow place where the water rushes through. That's what Kitselas means. Right? It's not a name, right? Same with Queensway, there's the community there is called Kalkspa. It's not a name of a place, it's a description. It's where we used to tie up and cross over to walk to Lickell's Lake. That's what Kalkspa means, right? And so those were, we could picture all of, as they'd explain, tell us about things, and that's how we learnt the language. There were no rules, right? There was no such thing as rules. There was no nouns or verbs or adverbs. It took me years to figure that out in English because I finally figured out it's all Latin. That's why I couldn't get it. Right? All those words are Latin. So trying to teach Somaliac using Latin is right. And I actually found this, it's similar. I found out it was actually similar to Chinese. Chinese have no rules in their language, but they can understand each other. It's just they just string words together. That's how they do it, and that's the same way we did it. There was no this word's got to come before this. Come back. You can mix them all up and still make sense. Right. Now, in Somaliac language, I'm switching now from Tsimshian to Somaliac. Every syllable is an image or a word. Now what they taught us, my grandmother used to tell us, every little sound is a word, separate word by itself. And you just put these little sounds together to make a complete thought, right? The image could be a thing, action, sound, person, anything that you can imagine. Even if it's something that isn't real, you can still imagine it. Right? Now, Somaliac, the word Somaliac itself is two words. Now, the SM at the beginning, it has a number of different meanings. It's used a number of different ways. In this case, it means real or important or superior. Right? That's what Sim means. Alyach means what I'm doing right now, I'm talking. That's what alyach means, I'm talking. Now when you put the two together, it becomes the real important, right? So when you're comparing two different languages, this is our language, it's Somaliac, the real language, right? And which is different from what the Nishka speak and what the Gitxan, I think they call theirs Gitxamach. Gitxamach is what they call theirs. Now this word is something that most of you probably heard. Every time somebody wants to makes a speech, they always start out with this word, Simoogit. Simoogit. What does that mean? Notice the word, the SM is there again. Right? No, it's actually 3 syllables. Simoogit. In other words, 3 separate words there. The SM in this word means important or high ranked. High ranked, it doesn't mean chief or it's high ranked. The last syllable git meaning a person. And the G in the middle, the GI, is a shortened form of git. So you're actually repeating the word person twice. Simoogit, right? So when you see this word or when you hear that word, sim means, like if I'm talking to you, all of you, I'll call you Simoogit because you are a group of important people. And there's more than one of you, so that's the gigit, right? So it refers to any number of people. Could be 2 or 3 people or 2 or 3,000 people, doesn't matter. Right? Because a lot of our Tsimshian language uses the double word to pluralize. I was actually, my dad actually comes from Sweden, so I was over there to visit my family over there, and we got talking about kids and grandkids. And I said, we don't say grandkids here, or great-grandkids. The word for child is born. The word for grandchild is born. The word for great-grandchild is born. He said, you just keep adding it. You just keep adding it. You got to count on your fingers. So it's used quite, it's a common thing to use, to use double words, right? Now I'm just throwing this in here. Iota is a male person. It doesn't mean male, because you don't use that for anybody, anything except humans, right? Same with no. So it means a woman, not a female, but a woman. Usually refers to a grown woman. Right? The sim sound is also used at the ends of the words, but it has a different purpose. Now, if I was going to, the word, there's another little word here that you might be interested in, is toich, meaning it's an expression of gratitude. And it's also used as, like I was talking to Robert about the word thank you. What does it mean? What does it mean in English? It doesn't really have much of a meaning. It's just being polite, right? And when you ask somebody how do you say thank you, they will always tell you toiren, because what it actually means is an expression of I'm grateful for what you're doing, grateful for what you did, or it's a handshake, right? So it doesn't mean the same as it does the thank you. It has a different, that's the old line. Today it probably means the same, but back in the old days it wasn't. I got a reason for doing this. Now that the old language, the language of 100 years ago, there's actually no dictionary. There's no dictionary of the old language. And the culture because the language has a real lot of culture in it. Like if you're looking at Bevan's where he says culture, that you'd have to really explain what that meant back then. It isn't just a village. It meant more than that. Now the problem is in the method of developing the books we did the same thing when we were doing the one in Kitselas. We used the same method with the elders. There's 2 ways to do it. One is the elders would pick a word and explain it. And you could take Bevan's work and pick a word and give it an explanation. In Gitsan, they speak the language they're still really fluent. A lot of the old timers are really fluent in it. The other is the method, is the how do you say method. How do you say this? How do you say that? And the problem with that, I've noticed that with a lot of our elders when they're asked that question, is that they make up a meaning, they make up a word, right? Because they're trying to please. Okay. The problem really is that the interviewer can't speak the language, and the person that they're asking doesn't have a full understanding of English. So the two words they don't understand the meaning of the word they're being asked. They're assuming, they make an assumption of what it means, right? So it ends up, the meaning, it becomes different. This is from the University of British Columbia. I used, this comes off the website, right? And this is kind of an example of how do you say. The problem I have with this, as a speaker, wanting to teach my kids or grandkids, right? It doesn't quite work, because the word yeah, meaning like I'm walking, this is called yeah. Right? And that isn't all it means. It means a bunch of other stuff too. But but when you read the word, the sentence, yan kalsarigimk, see, these two words are not the same. And in here, there's no word that says walk, move, the sun is too bright. Right? Move, the sun is too bright. Now, this one here, Sedamyayu. Notice this word and that word are not the same. Right? And so it's a result of, when you ask an elder, how do you say this? That's what they'll say, right? It's correct if you ask an elder, how do you say I'm going? They're going to say, Sedamyayu. What it means is I'm going to start walking. Is what it actually means. Right? But because we have, as I said earlier, it's evolving into the modern use. Right? The other thing that I because was is the word for rain, right? So that's correct. That's water coming down. But if you say it's raining, it's was. Now, when my grandfather was explaining this to me, now, in the old days they thought in systems, weather systems, the nature systems. And the way why we say was is the system is moving across the sky. So to him, that's what it was. That's how he explained it to me. When we say, it's not rain is walking, it's moving, right? So that's the cultural use behind it. Now, I've been fooling around trying to come up with ideas. This isn't complete. This is one of the things I was doing to try to find ways to actually explain. Like if we use the word to advance or travel on foot, right? It's not, I try to avoid just saying walk, even though it does mean walk. But let's try and explain what it actually means, right? To travel or move on foot for exercise, sa-pia, right? And actually sa-pia is a major, I call it a cultural activity. Because back, even when I was a kid, people used to just walk through the community, stop and talk to people. They socialized, they exchanged stories, they got news. It was actually a cultural thing that everybody just kind of walked around, right? It wasn't just for exercise. They had a reason, it's a cultural reason for it. Now, when I was in Clem 2 about 20 years ago, they were actually still doing it there. Where after work and after our supper, because I used to do some work down there, just wander out and stop and talk to everybody. There's people all over us, just walking around, talking to each other. It's how they communicated and kind of kept track of each other. You know, and to conduct oneself in a manner, pursue a particular course in life, right? So it has a lot of more meanings than just walk. You know, hagul, you hear that quite a bit, and if you've gone to funerals, you'll hear that people say that, hagulyan, take your time, go easy, right? You know, you'll make it type of thing. Just be patient, and that's what I did. Now here, down here, I was trying to explain the difference between this and that, right? Oops. Now the N, there's an N. You'll notice that I've actually put it in here, right here. It's with an N on the end. Now it refers to, I'm stealing from English here, second person singular plural used of the person being addressed, right? If I'm talking to you, as yan means you walk. It's referring to you as the person I'm addressed, right? Now the T, yet, refers to a person being discussed or last mentioned. And that person that I'm talking about is not in the room, right? You know, and if I said yan and he walked out and you were gone, and I say yet, means he left, he walked out, right? So I'm talking about somebody who's not there anymore. Now, M, it's actually, it comes out as M. Speaking to more than one person, or people which says yasam, that means all of you walk. So that's, the U is, the U on the end of the word means I'm talking about myself. Right. So when when you see this in, because unless you explain the N, see, does anyone remember what N means? Means you, right? Yeah, and the U means me, right? Yeah, you. Right. So it's easier to read if you break it down, easier to learn, right? Oops, I'm going back. I'll keep going backwards. Here's another example of what I was trying to do. This was actually from using Benin's work. In the one of the stories, this is just a title of that Benin uses. Malskam wala wals ayens simgigerim kan hada Kitselas, right? That's what's written. Remember now, that's Benin's spelling. Now I was looking at this word, malskam. Now it's a name of an activity. It's an activity. Benin uses the word an account. It means an account. Telling somebody something. Telling a story to a group of people. Keep in mind there was no written language, right? Now, if you translated what he said, this is a name of a person actually. An account of what happened to, that's easier. An account is malskam. of what happened to Willow Wells. And then the name, a high standing, Simoogit, high standing, and had is a raven of Kitselas. Okay, an account of what happened to Ayaransk, a raven of high standing in Kitselas. Okay. Now, okay, that down here, I'm trying to come up with, figure out the cultural context of that word back then, right? Not today. Today it's different today, but back when this was written, there was no word for story, right? Because stories didn't exist on their own. Today, if you want a story, you go to the library, pick it up, and it's there. You don't need somebody to tell it to you. It exists on its own. Since there was no written language, you couldn't go get a story. Somebody had to sit down and tell it to you. Right? Stories only existed during the telling by one person to another, and it only existed in the memory of somebody. Right? That's where it was. So the word that was used for stories is always about telling or talking. So Melscombe actually means me talking to you. Right? It doesn't mean a story about something. It means I'm talking to you. Right? No, I've always wanted the reason I do I've done all kinds of different ways of trying to figure out what's a good way to lay this out. Because the writing that I would like to, either I write it or find some way to get somebody to write it. Because I'm getting on in my years. The purpose would be not to change what is being done today. Because what is being done today is relevant for today. But to create a record of the old language in the context of the time and the culture that it was used. Right? And using the works of William Bevan. Now that there's a lot of record of if you look at William Bevan's, he recorded the stories in the language. There's lots of that. And I don't know I'd really like to see your uncle's work to see if he might have had the same idea, right? Of recording the old meanings of words. Because I don't see this dictionary as being used today, because it'll be just a record of you have to understand the culture of the time to understand what it means, right? So, and rather than creating meanings for words, because normally how it's being done today is you give a word and get somebody to explain it, to give a meaning to it. Rather find in the work, in those volumes, all the different ways that a word was used. I actually learnt that from Daniel Webster. That's how he did it. He found every English word. He didn't try to explain how they were, what they meant. What he did was find out how they are used, and then put a meaning on how it was used. And that it would be an awful lot of work, I think, but I'd like to see it done. At the same time, trying to find a method of teaching young children similar to the way we were taught. Because it is it's not a word, it's not a language about meanings, it's a language about images. Right? And to teach them as meanings, it doesn't really work very well. Because I had talked to one of the girls that took some of the courses. She says she's taken the beginner's course 3 times. She said, I better take it one more time. I didn't get it the last time. So it's find a way to do it. It's 1 o'clock again. So, who can read this besides you?
Somebody come up here.
Okay, I'll help you out here. Remember our first word, Simoogit, meaning all of you important people. And then Simoogit, remember the word hadach, meaning woman. Whenever you hear speech, people always start out like that. Simoogit, Simoogit hadach, kabawalsam, you always hear that. No, I don't, because when I was a kid, they only said Simoogit, they never said Simoogit hadach. Right? Because Simoogit refers to everybody. Right? It wasn't, I don't know if this is a translation of ladies and gentlemen. Right? So that's really what this is. Right? You know, so I remember the old timers when I was a kid standing up and saying Simoogit, and that's how they started. Kabawalsam is everybody uses that, but it actually means, Kaba means small children. Wealth was measured on, how much you can give away, and it was called amawel. If you're doing well, I'd call it amawel. And so the children of the people who are wealthy is what kabawalsam means, right? So today I'm saying this to you, right? Toiro, remember what you means? You is me, right? Toich means I'm grateful for you to be here, to listen, right? Toiro, nuusum. Nu meaning you guys, you. And SM means all of you. Toiro nuusum means I thank all of you. If I use the English, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all. Right, that's what it says. So I'm going to ask you this next week.
Are there any questions? Do we have just a couple of minutes? One or two burning questions? Again, our series will continue next week where we'll talk about culture. Brittany?
I guess what are some of the challenges in putting together a written record of a language that is so based on imagery, visual aspects? What are some of the complexities when doing that? Is it about finding different?
Brittany, can I ask you just, Mel will still be around for an hour afterwards?
Yeah.
And although our room and food may not. So just if you could meet with Mel afterwards.
Oh, for sure.
I just for housekeeping business and things like that, our next presentation is a global discussion of Kitselas culture. And then we will, or whatever Mel wants to talk about.
We may have to change that a bit. I'll talk to you about that.
Okay. The 25th, however, has been changed to May 9th, right? To accommodate Mel's out of residence in Ottawa. And lastly, Mel has made himself available to meet with individuals, both from the community, from classes, students, and things of that nature, and that has been very positive as well. So if you have some topics you want to discuss with Mel, please feel free to contact the front desk and we'll make that happen. So on behalf of all of us, can I say Oyuk? The deaf guys, right? Thank you all very much for coming today. And if you could hand in your papers, this is how we pay for our lunch. Thank you so much.